Hi everybody and welcome to the last video in this series of videos exploring labour markets. Now in the last video we were looking at labour market equilibrium points. So how wages will be determined by where supply of labour is equal to the demand for labour. And that would show us how many people would be employed and what the wage rate would be. Now that was kind of showing you how perfect labour markets work. And it was kind of suggesting that labour markets are brilliant. They're going to get things right. We're always going to get to that magic equilibrium point where the demand for labour is equal to the supply of labour. Now, the problem is that things are never perfect. So what we're going to be exploring on the back of that in this video are what we call labour market issues. So in other words, what problems do we have in labour markets across the UK economy? Okay, now you've got on the screen here 5 big labour market issues which I want to talk through with you briefly before we start thinking about what we call labour market failures, but then finding what governments can do to fix some of these different problems in labour markets. Now the first one I've got down here is something called a 0 hours contract. Now if any of you have got part-time jobs, there's probably a good chance that you are actually on a 0 hours contract. It's becoming a really, really popular way of employing people in the UK economy. So what we're going to do is rather than give people guaranteed numbers of hours when we employ them, let's say 16 or 20 hours or 30 hours or 40 hours, they're going to have no guaranteed hours at work each week. So what that will mean is some weeks you might be told, right, this week we want you to work 30 hours. The week after it could be 0 hours. So you've got no guaranteed hours of employment at work. Okay, now what I would say is from an employee perspective, many people would argue that these contracts are really, really bad. Let's think about the bad, but then we'll bounce it with some good there as well. Now, the bad thing for employees of these contracts are that you get very limited notice of what hours you're going to be working. Now, because I'm a full-time permanent member of staff, I know what my hours of employment will be from one week to the next. And that means that I can plan. I can plan childcare. I can plan what I'm going to do with my friends and family. Well, the people on 0 hours contract don't get that luxury. So you might, for example, be told today that next week you're going to be working on Sunday from 3 p.m. till 10 p.m. Well, if that's the case, then you've got a very limited amount of time to organise your out of work responsibilities. And that could be childcare, but it could just be that, meeting up with your friends for, going out for a meal, etc. So it makes it really difficult to plan ahead if you're on this type of contract. The biggest problem, though, is having no guaranteed income. So your income will clearly fluctuate with how many hours you get from work. The trouble is your bills don't fluctuate with how many hours you're offered. So if you've got a set rent to pay, let's say £500 a month, well, what are you going to do with 3 weeks in that month? You don't get any hours of employment from work. You've got no income. Now, if you're in that kind of situation, it makes it very difficult for you to budget, plan ahead, pay bills, but also makes it really difficult to borrow money. No bank, for example, is going to want to give people in this situation a mortgage because they'll be worried these people will not be able to repay them. So you've got some big, big problems there for employees. What I would say, though, is there are some benefits for employees. They tend to be quite good for young people, students, for example, who have got other commitments outside of work. And the reason being, you can technically say to your employer, look, 2 weeks, I don't want any hours at work. And you're under no legal obligation to accept any hours of employment if you let them know. Well, that means if you've got exams coming, you can take time off work to study. You won't get an income, but you've got that flexibility. It could also mean if you're a university student and you're back from university for the summer, you can say to your employer, right, I would like loads of hours for the next few weeks, please. And hopefully they'll be able to give you them. Now, for the employers, the businesses themselves, there are some benefits of these. The reason why they like to give people these contracts, lots of businesses anyway, is because of derived demand theory. Now, let me list some companies that give people 0 hour contracts. McDonald's, for example, employs lots of people on these contracts. Burger King, Sports Direct, Wetherspoons, Domino's Pizza, Cineworld, Subway, Boots. Now, these companies have what we call a fluctuating demand for their products that they sell. So, for example, if you're McDonald's, you might find some months and weeks across the year you're really, really busy. Other months or weeks across the year, you're really, really quiet. So what you want to do is to give workers more hours when you're busy, but then fewer hours when you are quiet. So you are fluctuating your demand for your workers based on the demand for the products that workers have to produce. Now, when you think about it, that's really, really smart. Because what that allows you to do is to keep your costs to the lowest possible level. Now, what that will do, it will help you either cut your costs and make bigger profit margins, or it might allow you to lower prices to compete better and gain more customers. There's another crafty thing for this as well. If you're an employer, you can almost use these contracts as a way of selecting the best workers. So let's say, for example, you recruit 2 people on 0-hour contracts, and you work out in the first 2 or 3 weeks that one of them is really, really hard working, really, really efficient, really, really good at their job. But the other one is lazy, inefficient, and not very good. Well, what you can now do, you can give more hours to the worker that's productive and fewer hours to the one that's not very good. And that will raise the overall productivity of your business. Now, drawbacks, though, for employers could be that many people don't like working on these types of contracts. So you've got to question, how committed will the workforce be that work in these types of businesses? Will they stay long term? Probably not. Now, you therefore find that these businesses that employ people on these contracts have what we call a very high staff turnover. They're going to find people leaving quite regularly. And that means you constantly have to recruit more people, which costs a lot of money, takes a lot of time, and train them all up. And that probably means quite often on shift, you've got a lot of people who are not very motivated to be there, and they're not very good at their jobs because they've not been working there very long. So overall, everyone, it swings and roundabouts. There's good and bad in 0-hour contracts. Now, the next thing I want to mention is something that we call the gig economy. Now, if you're a member of the gig economy, which again is a growing type of employment in the UK, then instead of getting a regular wage, then you are getting paid for gigs that you do. Now, what I mean by that is you might be paid for individual jobs. So you might be, for example, be able to bid for the right to deliver takeaways to someone's house next Thursday night. You might work for Amazon on a Saturday morning, but you're only going to be employed to deliver parcels on that particular morning. So you tend to find that gig economy work is where people are on lots of short-term contracts. So you're going to be employed for maybe 3 hours, 4 hours, but as soon as you finish that particular day's work, you're no longer employed by the company again. Okay, so it's lots and lots of short-term contracts that you're picking up from different companies. And you tend to find the gig economy is really, really popular amongst couriers. So Amazon, for example, will employ people as part of the gig economy. People can apply for the right to complete work for Amazon for Saturday morning. But as soon as they've delivered all them parcels, that's it, it's gone. Uber also has people employed in the gig economy. People bid for the right to complete different jobs on behalf of Uber. Now, the idea is, everyone, and this is where the problems kick in with these. For the businesses, the great thing about these is that when you give people work to do as part of the gig economy, they're not classed as employees. They're what we call independent contractors. So these people don't get the same protection that workers get when they work and are employed by a company. So you don't get any protection against unfair dismissal. You've got no right to redundancy payments. And there's no right to the minimum wage or paid holidays or sickness pay. So the idea is that these people, though, that get this work as part of the gig economy, they're not protected in the same way that other employees will be when they're officially employed by companies on a more long-term basis. Obviously, the great thing for businesses is it's really, really flexible, and it helps them reduce their costs massively. Now, the next one, everyone, is something we call skill shortages. Now, this is a big problem in Britain. We have, for example, a lack of people that can supply their labour in STEM-related jobs. Now, all STEM stands for is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. There's not enough people that have got these skills in the economy. And that therefore means that businesses that need people with these skills can't get hold of them. There's a lack of people that have got these skills to work in the economy. And that means that workers are unable to supply their labour where the vacancies are. So firms that are trying to get hold of these people cannot recruit them because these people don't exist. And that creates lots of problems for the businesses. But it's also really, really frustrating though as well. You've got this big demand for labour, but the people who are unemployed are unable to take those vacancies. So you've got problems or imperfections in the labour market. Demand for people with these skills, but there isn't the supply there. So the unemployed remain unemployed. The firms remain unsatisfied. They can't get hold of the workers they need. Now, another growing problem is youth unemployment. You tend to find across the country that young people, so people under the age of 24, are the most likely to be unemployed in the country. Employers tend to favour older workers, maybe because they're deemed to be more productive, maybe more reliable, they've got more experience. So people in this age bracket might find it very difficult to be demanded as workers. So again, these people are unemployed, they can't meet wants and needs because they can't get hold of an income from supplying their labour. We've also got in Britain a growth in the retirement age. So historically, and by the way, let's explain what the retirement age is. Now, you can retire whenever you want, but you've got to be able to have the money to be able to afford to retire. Now, many people have to wait until the state retirement age because that is the age that you qualify for a state pension. So the government will pay you a pension historically in Britain if you're a woman that's reached the age of 60 and if you're a man, the age of 65. But due to a growth in the elderly population, more people living longer, and lots of government debt, the government have increased the retirement age. So it's going to be growing over the next few years to 68 years of age. Now that would mean there's going to be more older people working for longer. Now that could mean that we've got even more problems for young people to get jobs if the older people are more favoured by the young people. So, you know, you've got more people of a more senior age working across the economy due to that increase in the state retirement age. Now, everyone, this is the big bit. We're looking here at labour market failures. Now, hopefully you remember from theme 1 that a market failure is when the free market economy, it's the price mechanism, creates a misallocation of resources. So we're not maximising economic welfare. Now, both geographical and occupational immobility of labour can create labour market failures. Now remember, geographical immobility of labour is when people are unable to accept or supply their labour in jobs with geographical problems. So internationally, this could be a lack of visas, lack of work permits available, the inability to relocate from one country to another. It could be a case of you're unable to work in a different region of your country, and that could be due to the high cost of housing. It could be due to the high cost of transport, or it could be due to the long time of transport. You know, if road networks are congested or train lines are too slow, etc., that can also create geographical immobility of labour. Now, occupational immobility of labour is where people lack the skills, or should I say they lack the appropriate skills. So in other words, if people haven't got the skills demanded by businesses, they're going to find it difficult to supply their labour. Now look at some of the problems that are created by immobility of labour. We could have unemployment. There might be reasons why people are unable to supply their labour. So there might be a demand for labour in a different part of the country, but you're unable to work in that industry because it's too far away or you can't afford to relocate. Or it could be that you lack the skills to apply for those jobs in that industry. So these people that have got these problems will find it difficult to supply their labour, and that could lead to a growth in unemployment across the economy. And of course, if people are unemployed, they lack an income, and they're going to find it more difficult to meet their wants and needs. Now, linked to this, we have something we call underemployment. This is where somebody is working in a job below their skill level. So this could be someone with a degree in economics stacking shelves in Wilkinson's. But it could also be somebody that wants full-time work, but they're only getting temporary part-time work. So underemployment, everyone, is someone that is working in a job below their skill level, and they're getting insufficient hours of employment. So they're not really fully employed. They're not fully using their skills, and they're not working as many hours what they would like. Now, the reason why immobility can create this problem is there might be your dream job in a different part of the country. But if you're unable to relocate or commute to that job, you might be forced to accept a lower paid job where you live. Maybe even a job below your true skill level, because you can't relocate to that job. Or it could be that where you live, there are really well paid jobs, but you lack the skills to work in those jobs. And that will force you to accept potentially underemployment within your local economy. So again, you're not receiving the maximum wage that you'd like, or your skills would normally demand. Next one, labour shortages. Now, if you're a business and you're demanding workers, but the people who can do that job are based in a different part of the country and they can't travel to you, then you're going to find it difficult to get hold of the right workers. Or if there are people where you live wanting jobs but they lack the skills for them jobs, again, you will struggle to get hold of the workers that you need. Now, if you can't get hold of the workers that you need, then ultimately it's going to hold back the ability to produce. It could mean that you've got to give people who lack the skills jobs which normally require higher skilled people, and that would affect your productivity. Well, that's going to make it difficult for firms to make profit. Now, another problem is wage inequality. Now, think about why. You tend to find that across our country, different regions will have different wage rates. So in England, for example, in the southeast of England, which includes London, wage rates are higher than what they are in the north of England. But geographical barriers will make it difficult for people to relocate to take better paid work in the southeast of England. You're therefore forced to accept a lower wage where you're based at the moment. Now, other problems though as well. Within your town, there could be better paid jobs available. But if you lack the skills to do them, again, you're forced to accept lower paid work. So everyone, in effect, the only reason why some people earn more than others is that there are barriers that stop people moving into better paid work. And that could be driven by either geographical or occupational problems. Right, we're now going to think then about how can we tackle some of these problems in labour markets. Now, what we could be thinking about first of all is what can we do to tackle geographical immobility of labour? What can the government do? Now, what they could simply do is to give people access to more information. If you make people more aware about different vacancies that exist in other parts across the country, then people are more able to relocate if they know these jobs exist. If they don't know they exist, well, they can't go for them, can they? So that could be through, better advertisements of jobs in job centres, maybe national campaigns letting know where there are shortages of workers in different parts across the country, and that will allow more people to move to where the jobs actually are. Other things that can be done are things such as rent controls or build more state housing. One big barrier for people relocating into better paid job areas is the cost of living in those parts of the country. So if you were to make rents more affordable through maximum rents, so what we call rent controls, or you build more council housing and offer it at low prices, then more people are able to move to where the jobs actually are. Grants and subsidies can also be used. So we could offer people money to cover some of their relocation costs. Or what we could do is subsidise transport to allow more people to travel bigger distances to get to work. So if you reduce the price of travelling on trains or buses, that will help more people commute bigger distances to go to work. Now, of course, another way around this, if we can't get people to go to the jobs, get the jobs to go to the people. So we could offer firms grants or subsidies to relocate to where unemployed people are. And again, that would help those people get work. We could, of course, also upgrade transport networks. So build bigger, faster train networks, road networks, etc., to allow people to commute bigger distances to get to work. So when you think about it, what we're trying to do here is to tackle a bit of a mismatch in the economy. We're going to try and take the people who haven't got work to where the jobs actually are. But if you can't get people to go to where the jobs are, you've got to take the jobs to the people. That's how we tackle geographical immobility. Now, occupational immobility is where people are unable to work or supply their labour due to a lack of skills. Well, there's an easy solution then, isn't there? Boost skills across the economy. So upgrade and spend more money on education and training. Upgrade the skills of people in schools and colleges and universities. Incentivise more people to go to university, become higher skilled. That can also help. Now, what we've got to try and give people are what we call transferable skills. We want people who lose jobs in one industry to be able to go work in another industry. So have skills that they can use across a range of different jobs. So again, we could boost apprenticeship programs, again, try and encourage more people to go to university by subsidising university education, etc. Now, a lot of this, though, is a bit more targeted than this. What we tend to do is to identify skill gaps across the economy. So in the UK, for example, we know we've got a shortage of people that have got STEM qualifications. So what we can do, now we know this is a problem, we can try and target these skills in schools to try and incentivise more people to study these types of qualifications at school, but then also incentivise more people to do these things as degrees, to give the economy the skills it needs to be productive going forward. Now, everyone, what we can then also do, remember what we said, immobility of labour can create barriers that stop people accepting better paid work across the economy. So we all know, for example, that people that work in finance will get paid more money than people that are cleaners. But there are barriers that stop cleaners from becoming financial advisors. We know that people in the southeast of England earn more money than the people in the northeast of England, but there are barriers that stop them people going into the better paid jobs. So another intervention could be to use what we call minimum and maximum wages. Now, in both of these diagrams, the red equilibrium point, highlighted in yellow, is the equilibrium wage rate. Now look at the minimum wage first of all. If we think the market equilibrium wage that low people get paid is too low, then we could say to employers, the lowest that you can pay people is WMIN. So raise wages up above the current equilibrium point. Maximum wages, if we think that some people get paid too much of a wage, then what we do is we set a maximum wage. We say to employers, you cannot pay these people above that wage at that level there. Now think about some of the benefits of what we've got here. Minimum wages, what they do, they would increase the wage rates of low-income earners. That will hopefully mean that people are receiving a living wage from supplying their labour. But what it will also hopefully then do is to reduce inequality, to cut that gap between the high-paid and the low-paid people across the economy, make society a bit more equal. Now, another benefit though as well is if you were to increase wage rates, we can see it would incentivise an extension in supply. What you're doing is you're giving people a bigger incentive to work. You're raising the opportunity cost of not working, but you're also giving people a better wage to fund some of the costs of going to work, childcare, etc., transport costs. So you might actually create a bigger pool of workers for businesses to actually employ. Now, drawbacks of them though, it will also contract the demand for labour. High wage rates mean that firms become less reluctant to employ people. So it's therefore going to create overall an excess supply of labour. In other words, unemployment. So if it's going to mean unemployment's now going to exist, you could argue it might push more people actually into poverty. Well, that you could argue is an unintended consequence. But that is an example of government failure that might be creeping in here. Now, another problem though as well is that when you increase wage rates, you are raising the costs of production for businesses. Now, firms are therefore going to have to probably raise prices. Now, that is what we call across the economy inflation. And if prices start to grow, then it means that people from lower income backgrounds will again increasingly find it difficult to meet their wants and needs. I think it's worth noting that the impact on unemployment will depend on Red and West. if the demand and supply of labour are, for example, inelastic, the impact on the number of unemployed people that it creates will be far lower than if the WED and WES were both elastic. And if you drew them, you could see exactly what I mean by that. Now, of course, it also depends on the magnitude. How much will the minimum wage increase wage rates by? Now, maximum wage. Now, if we say to really, really high paid professions across the country, there's a legal limit to how much you can pay these people, then again, it lowers inequality. It brings down that gap between high paid workers and low paid workers. Now, also paying high paid workers less might mean that more money in businesses is tied up to give lower paid people more money. Well, that could be a good thing at tackling that gap between high and low paid earners. What we can also do, though, because of maximum wages, is to cut the cost of production. If firms are now paying their high paid workers less, cost of production will fall. These firms now might be able to lower prices, which benefits everyone across the country. Now, another benefit of maximum wage is this: it prevents the most skilled going to what they would regard to be the best or the best paid jobs. So if, for example, being a lawyer pays fantastically well compared to being an engineer, then everyone will train to go work as a lawyer. Or if working in finance pays the best, people train to become financial workers. Now, the problem with that is it will create a shortage of workers in other parts across the economy. And if that's the case, it could mean that we've got a lack of doctors in the country or nurses if people are focusing on getting into them better paid jobs. Making them jobs pay less will hopefully mean that more people will train to do other things across the economy as well. Problems, though, of maximum wages: it can disincentivize going to work. You're almost penalising people that have worked and built up the skills to take on board them really, really high paid jobs. So if you're taking away the incentive to work, it could affect motivation. You might even find that these high skilled workers might now leave the country to go work in other countries across the world where they can earn more money. Now, we call that brain drain, where you lose your best paid workers if they can now earn more money in another country across the world. Another problem, though, and it kind of ties in with that idea: if it disincentivizes work and your best people leave, it's going to create a shortage of high skilled workers. So it could mean that employers find it difficult to attract the right workers into their organisations. Now, on the last slide is this. One thing you need to be aware about is the difference between the public sector and the private sector. Now, the public sector are workers who are employed by the state or by the government, in effect. So teachers, doctors, police officers, etc. are public sector workers. Private sector workers are people that are employed by profit-making companies. So these organisations are owned by shareholders or by private individuals. Now, the idea would be that, in effect, these two different sectors are competing for workers. So public sector needs workers, but so does the private sector. Now, technically, if you're a worker deciding, where do I supply my labour? You've got a choice. Do you go to the public sector, or do you go to the private sector? Now, think about what this could mean then. If we were to increase public sector wages, so give teachers, doctors, nurses more money, etc., it would mean that more people will supply their labour in the public sector. And that would mean that less people become willing and able to work in the private sector. So what the private sector would need to stop all their workers leaving to go work in the public sector is to increase private sector wages. So you tend to find that when the public sector gets big pay rises, the private sector's got to match it to prevent all their workers leaving to go work in the public sector. Now, at the moment, though, many public sector jobs are having a pay freeze. So the wage rates of public sector workers are not growing. Now, in theory, that would help out the private sector, because what it won't mean is that lots of private sector workers will leave to go work in the public sector. But there is a problem. What the private sector might now be able to is to raise wage rates and nick all the best qualified public sector workers. Now, everyone, the big takeaway point from this slide, though, is that these two sectors are in competition with each other. If one raises wage rates, the other one's probably got to follow suit to stop all their best paid workers or best skilled workers leaving to go work in the other sector. So a good example could be NHS doctors and Bupa doctors. NHS doctors work in the public sector, whereas Bupa doctors work in the private sector. Now, if the NHS was to pay doctors more money, then Bupa has probably got to pay its doctors more money in order to keep the doctors working for Bupa. Of course, if Bupa raises the wage rates of doctors, the NHS, to stop its workers leaving to go work for Bupa, will also have to increase their wage rates as well. So it's really, really important that you understand how, when public sector change its wage rates, how it would impact on the private sector and vice versa. Right, anyway, everyone, that is the end of labour market. So thank you very much for watching.